This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. With all of this noise about the Brandon Ayuk trade, there has been something else that has slid under the radar for Browns fans that has been reported, credibly so, to the point to where I'm willing to throw it on this channel, which is the stadium, the long-rumored Brook Park Stadium for the Cleveland Browns, looks to be a reality that's going to be announced fairly soon. This is coming from a report from the Northeast Ohio Transportation blog. They say this right here in the article. The $3.6 billion stadium and development to be revealed. In the coming weeks, the owner of the Cleveland Browns will reveal the plans to build a new $3.6 billion dome stadiums, associated development. According to the public sector sources familiar with the plans, owners Jimmy and Dee Haslam have their capital funding identified for the stadium in small first phase of development. The cost of the new dome stadium and the provision of about 220,000 and the provision of 20,000 parking spaces almost entirely in surface lots is estimated at $2.2 billion. Half of that will be privately funded and create tax revenues, which will fund the other half, much of which funding for the stadium comes from bonds by new stadium-related revenues and city council and state-generated stadium activities and employment. Another $1.4 billion in private stadium development is also planned. So what does this all mean? One, it means that this debate with the city was less about getting money to fund the stadium, which we usually assume, especially our history in Cleveland, it's what it's almost always been about, and more about the Haslam's desire to build a dome. They want a dome. This is about building a dome. If they took the $500 million from Cleveland, the city of Cleveland, that would not build a dome. It's impossible to, well, it's not impossible, but it's very cost ineffective to throw a ceiling on an existing stadium for a number of reasons. It just doesn't work the way people want it to. So that was never really an option. The options were stay at Cleveland Browns Stadium, make it real nice, even though that stadium's now approaching 20 something years old, or build a new dome. The Browns want to build a new dome. Like the Cleveland just had SummerSlam in Cleveland. It was a big event. It was really cool. And it was really nice that they could have that. I bet Cleveland, Jimmy Haslam, the people on that stadium would love to have WrestleMania there, would love to have a Beyonce concert, would love to have a Taylor Swift concert. I think this was about getting a state-of-the-art facility, not just for, I think ego reasons definitely played a factor, right? I think Jimmy Haslam, he wants to be the owner of a football team that has a state-of-the-art stadium. He wants people to say the nice things about owners who have those things, especially within his circle. This is also like a ploy for him to impress his billionaire friends. And look at my new nice stadium, right? Like, let's not act like ego isn't a part of this when it comes to Jimmy Haslam. That plays a part, but I think also the revenue part plays a part. It's a good location too, to have a dome, because this dome would be right next to the airport, and it will revitalize that whole area. Now, if you've never been to Cleveland or you've never flown into Cleveland, you know that area near the airport, it's pretty barren. There's like, and I'm not even joking, like there's like some parking garages there, some random parking lots. There's a really long shuttle you have to take to the rental car facility for the airport. And then there's like strip clubs. Like that's really all that's out there. So I get why they saw that as a prime opportunity to build something, because imagine you can have conventions at the stadium pretty easily because it's right next to the airport. You can have concerts, motocross or whatever you want to. You can have all the things that you want to host there at a bigger venue there at a very convenient location for people who want to come in and watch it. Also, it allows Jimmy Haslam again to, feel good about himself, right? Because he can build this nice thing. Look at all this nice stuff. Now let's get into how it's funded, because how it was funded was a interesting little tidbit in there. Let me bring that page back up. The cost of the new Dome Stadium, as the provision of the 20,000 parking spots, almost entirely in surface lots. I'll talk about that being a little bit of an issue in a minute. Is estimated at $1.2 billion. Remember, the quote for this is about $3.6 billion. It's probably going to end up being $4 or $5 billion by the end of it, because what you're quoting at the beginning is never what you pay at the end when it comes to these stadiums. So it's $3.6 billion, but I wouldn't be surprised to find out at the end of this is $5 billion. Much of which the funding for the stadium will come from bonds serviced by the new stadium related revenues in city, county, and state taxes generated by stadium activities and employment. This is a good thing. If you are worried about this being taken out of the taxpayer's budget, this is a good thing, because how the stadium is paying is that it's paying for itself, right? So they're going to have taxes for the vendors who want to sell near Cleveland Browns Stadium. Basically, let me go back a little bit to explain this a little clearer. Basically, what the Cleveland Browns want to do is create a stadium district in Brook Park. Now, there's a lot of places that have this. It's a little bit of a thing in downtown Cleveland, East 9th, where there's a little bit of a stadium district there. If you've ever been to an Atlanta Braves game, there's this thing called the Battery in Atlanta. I think that's a good model to look at when you're wondering what these stadium districts are going to look like. And in these stadium districts, they're like little mini downtowns. They have shopping, they have stores, food, and apartments in this little stadium district. I will talk about some of the pros and cons of that model, because I think there's a lot of good things. There's some bad things about it too. But that's what they're trying to build. They're trying to build a stadium district. And I think that's a good use of that land, because one of my biggest criticisms about building these billion-dollar football stadiums is that, yeah, you get people to show up maybe 20 times a year if you have some events going on in your city. But what do you do with that area of ground when that's not going on? Like, the same thing happens with Cleveland Browns Stadium. What do they do with that plot of land when the Browns aren't playing? They do nothing with it. This would solve that problem a little bit. So they plan to have a stadium district. I think there's something similar to it, like in Beechwood. It's not a stadium district because there's no stadium in Beechwood, but it's the same idea. It's like an outdoor shopping mall with a bunch of restaurants and a bunch of things to do and a bunch of sports bars. So even if you don't go to the stadium, you can come to the stadium district, watch the game, be around the Browns. I imagine when they do watch parties and stuff, they're going to want to do this. But if you're wondering what this is going to look like, I would look at what the Atlanta Braves did in Atlanta with the Battery. That will be a good model for what they're probably aiming for in Cleveland. So the good things about this news to me, this is not going to be taxpayer funded, as far as like we're not going to have Ohio and city and county taxes raised just to pay for the stadium. The stadium is being paid for by taxes generated from the stadium and private investment from Jimmy Haslam and his company. Okay, that's fine. It's not the best option, but it's fine, right? It serves the fundamental purpose of building something like this. I don't know if the city is fronting and loaning money to make this happen, but they're basically saying, hey, if you sell here, they're going to tax you and all this stuff. And those taxes are going to go towards the cost of building the stadium, et cetera, et cetera. So that is the plan to fund the stadium. Does not seem like taxpayer money is involved. I don't just want to go off my opinion of it. My friend Jared Mueller, who I've had on this channel before, very trustworthy guy, insider for the Cleveland Browns. He also had this take as well in his article. Make sure you go and check it out. So Jared said the wording of that section I read earlier in this video indicates a deal that barely involves taxpayers footing the bill outside through using services in and around the arena, the stadium. Besides the stadium, a large chunk of the land would be used for other development, and that is why I talked about they're doing like the battery kind of development there in Brook Park. It's going to be like a little mini downtown. Now, let's talk about the pros and cons of the Browns building this stadium in Brook Park, and not the pros and cons for the football team. We already know the pros and cons of playing indoors versus outdoors. I think those arguments have been had. All I will say to arguments about that are people who are hesitant about the ambiance that you could create in an indoor stadium. I would say this, if you're worried about that. These new domes ain't the old domes. You don't feel like you're inside when you're in these new domes, right? I'm talking about like Mercedes-Benz Stadium, Minnesota Stadium. Like these domes, Lucas Oil even, don't feel like you're inside. They feel great. So if you're worried about it feeling stale and lame inside, it's probably going to be state of the art. It's probably going to be one of the fanciest things you've ever seen in your life. And it's probably going to be something that attracts the Browns to get a lot of good stuff to come to the city of Cleveland, maybe even a Super Bowl. We know how the NFL does. They have one in Minnesota. They can have one in Cleveland. So if you're worried about the ambiance, I would say construction for domes has gotten significantly better than when this was last considered in the early 2000s. So this is not going to be like the RCA Dome or the Hubert Humphrey Dome or something like that. This is going to be much nicer. That being said, there are some pros, there are some cons for you, the regular person who may or may not go to a Cleveland Browns game. I do think the tickets are going to be more expensive. The tickets are already expensive. Now, I don't think the team is going to raise the price, but what will happen is since the Browns Stadium is outdoors, if it's cold outside, there's a lot of people who won't go, which means there's a lot of people selling their tickets. That market is going to be less existent. It's still going to exist. There's still going to be people who don't even want to braid the elements to get to the stadium. And they're still going to sell their tickets. But like when it gets super cold and you could buy a Browns ticket for like $6, even when they're good. Yeah, that's probably not going to go down as much anymore, right? Because the stadium will be indoors. You're not going to see those super discounted runs unless like the team's awful, and nobody wants to go inside. So that's one. Parking is a huge concern, right? They said they're going to get 20,000 parking spots. Now, the stadium's probably going to hold a lot more than 20,000 people, but 20,000 parking spots. And they're all going to be, what they said in that video, surface level parking spots. I don't know if you guys have ever been to these gigantic stadium districts, but when there's that many surface parking spots and you have to navigate the lot to get out, it's hell. It's hell. Now, there's a way they can mitigate this, right? Because if the Browns' plan is to basically make it so the only really good place to park is in their lot, the traffic coming in and out of that stadium is going to be awful. The good news is that they are near the airport, which means they're already near an area that will have a lot of parking garages available. The reason the parking garages are good, especially if they build up that area, there's parts of Brook Park that only got sidewalks. Like, assuming they build up that area, add some sidewalks, make it walkable to get to the city from the parking garage, from the transit rail, then that really does cut down on the issue. But if the plan is everybody has to try to park here to get to the stadium, that's going to be a traffic disaster. It's always a traffic disaster. Also concerns about the traffic going into Brook Park. I mean, this is not an area that is used to this amount of traffic that will be coming to Cleveland Browns games. And again, we're not just talking about Browns games. We're talking about Beyonce concerts. We're talking about Taylor Swift concerts. We're talking about people flying in. Is Hopkins Airport ready for a lot more people coming to the city of Cleveland? It's a good problem to have, but it's a problem. And it's definitely not going to be clean the first couple of years. Like, I expect this to be a shit show for the first couple of years, just because it's such a big project. It's such a radical change. And so many people feel so many different ways about it. It's going to be a shit show the first couple of years. But eventually, it'll be fine. The stadium district stuff. Now, I've been to the Battery in Atlanta pretty often. I've been there a lot. So I like how that works, right? That little stadium district where there's a bunch of restaurants and there's a bunch of stores and stuff, and you could park there. There's like a lot of different parking garages to get to the stadium. There's a trail and a public transit line that run, well, not a public transit line in Atlanta, but a little bike trail that you could use to bike there. There's a lot of nice stuff about how that works and how these new stadium districts work. Again, the issue is parking. The parking for the Battery is pretty reasonable. In Atlanta, it's like $25 for like a day, and then like it's free for the first 2 hours, unless it's an event parking thing where you have to pay $25 on game day to park to watch the Braves. So this could potentially also help lower those parking deck prices. I know from people in Cleveland, I've heard that these parking deck prices are insane. Like, I've heard as high as $70 to park your car in a little rinky-dink parking garage on East 9th, and then you still gotta walk like a mile to the stadium. What the Browns can do, and what I would hope Jimmy Haslam would do, is build some garages around this, right? Not just the surface lots, but build some garages and make sure you keep the price at like $25, $30. This forces the garages to keep their prices at $25, $30. Whatever they set the price to be, that's going to be the price for the market. The problem with Cleveland Browns Stadium is that in order to park at the stadium, you had to be a season ticket holder for like 40 years. So parking to the stadium for the regular person was not an option. You had to take the garages, and the garage places got to set the price for the parking, which let the price skyrocket. It's not about the city it's in, because there are bigger cities that don't charge that much for parking. It's more about the fact that the team did not have any kind of way to control that parking price. So now they will. They can be good about it and say, hey, $30 parking. $40 parking is a little bit high, but $30 parking, I think that's reasonable for anybody who wants to go to an event. Like, you're going to be willing to do that. I prefer $20 parking. I prefer free parking, but I prefer public transit. But we know how it gets down there with people, cars, all that stuff. So that is a little bit of my concern, what the parking situation is going to be like there in Brook Park, what the public transit situation is going to be like there in Brook Park. It's going to be a move, and I think this move is going to make it a little bit more expensive at times to get to the stadium, right? This is further away from the city core. It's further on the west side of the city, right? The east side of the city is where a lot of the public transit is. There's still a lot of public transit on the west side, but not really. You want this to be something where it's accessible for both sides of the city to get to for a reasonable price. That's been the main complaint about Cleveland Browns Stadium. It's way too expensive to go to the stadium. The ticket prices were insane. The charges for parking were insane. Sometimes you could pay a bunch of money for parking, still get booted or still get ticketed. It was just too much. The Browns have the opportunity to fix that a little bit. It's going to be messy. It's going to be sloppy. It's a big undertaking. They're going to pretty much develop the city of Brook Park near the airport. And I wouldn't be surprised if upgrades to the airport have to happen as this stadium becomes more and more real, or after this stadium becomes real and we realize just how small Cleveland Hopkins International is compared to what the volume might be for a Super Bowl, for a big time concert, right, of people coming into town. Also, it's probably going to make the hotels in the area better. I know that the hotels there, like, you basically gotta go to Independence or somewhere like in Solon to get a decent hotel for a decent price. So maybe that does something for the hotels. But if you're wondering, do I think this is going to be good for the average Browns fan? It depends on who you are. But if you're somebody who's willing to spend a little bit of money for some comfort, to be indoors and not freezing off, you're probably going to have a great time with this. I do have my concerns. Like, are they going to run a transit line to the stadium? Are they going to make this stadium accessible for people who want to park and walk? Are they going to make this stadium accessible for people who want to park and ride on the transit system? That needs to be something that gets done. As far as prices to the stadium, like, I know that since they're paying for the stadium with tax revenues generated from the things that they sell at the stadium and in the stadium district itself, will that make prices insane, right? Will they overcharge people to try to get their money back? Like, will they overcharge people to try to get their money back? Will these prices be absurd? Hopefully that's not the route that the Browns go. It'd be horrible PR for them. But that's another concern, right? Because if you have that stadium district and you're charging $18 for a cocktail in that stadium district, nobody's going to go to it when you can get a cocktail for $12 downtown or $8 downtown. So it's going to be interesting how they try to get their money back, right? Because the revenue is going to dictate that. Are they going to try to get it with ticket sales? Are they just going to squeeze ticket holders, season ticket holders even more? I know season ticket holders have been pretty mad recently. So we'll see. But I do think that the cost of the tickets might get a little bit more expensive. We'll see what they do with concessions. Atlanta did not raise concession prices. They actually lowered it, but that was an Arthur Blank thing. Some places go crazy with the concession prices because, again, they're trying to make their money back on this investment, even though they probably will make it back within like the first 5 years of that stadium just existing if they just push normal revenues. So it's interesting there, but it seems like it's definite now. It's going to happen. The Browns are going to play in a dome in the near future. They're building a $3.6 billion dome. And that means it's probably going to be state of the art. It's going to take about 5 years, 6 years to build. And it seems like they're ready to announce this. So for the first time in the Browns history, they are preparing to play somewhere that's not on the lake. It'll be a new era for the Cleveland Browns. And as long as the team's good, I think everybody will embrace it. Right. And this brings me to my last anecdote of the day, which is interesting because they did this move right now. And I think the fact that it's happening in 2024, when people actually now have fond memories of that stadium, makes it harder to let go of that stadium and that plot of ground specifically, because now we associate it with good things. Whereas if they did this in like 2014, dog, we would have been like, yeah, do it. Like, people hated the new Cleveland Browns stadium for the longest time, and until the team got good again, which probably illuminates how we'll feel about the dome. Even if you're anti-dome, if the team's good in there, you'll find shit to love about that dome. So that's happening. I am cautiously excited about it. You know, whenever you get a dome, you have to worry about, well, whenever you're building a new stadium or your ownership is building a new stadium, you have to keep an eye out for like pretty shady business practices. It's still the NFL that we're talking about. But right now, everything looks like it's on the up and up. We'll see how it goes going forward. But yeah, Browns getting a new stadium. Seems official.